black woman tackled at airport security reveals she's there to shut the place down. A tumultuous confrontation erupted under the fluorescence of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Not everyone saw how it began, but everyone felt the ripple of tension that swept across the concourse when a young black woman was pinned to the floor by security agents. Passers-by froze, phones half raised. Whispers ran through the crowd like wildfire. Some claimed she'd attacked first. Others insisted she was innocent. One thing became certain: she had come there on a mission. In a voice echoing with defiance, she declared she was there to shut the whole place down. And in that moment, everything changed. As sunrise lit the vast tarmac of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the usual morning rush pressed forward in endless lines. Business travelers balanced coffees on rolling suitcases while families fanned out, trying to keep track of children and boarding passes. The hum of announcements resonated through the corridor: gate changes, final calls, security updates, forming a constant droning backdrop to the travelers' excitement, frustration, and weariness. Dahlia Henderson arrived in a simple grey hoodie and worn-out jeans, blending in with the morning crowd. Her hair was styled in neat, tight coils that spilled around her shoulders. She kept her eyes focused, as if zeroing in on an unspoken task. With each step, she breathed slowly, like an actor preparing for a performance. Her phone buzzed, but she ignored it. She had come too far to let second thoughts deter her now. As Dahlia approached the Transportation Security Administration (TSA) checkpoint, she subtly surveyed her surroundings. Uniformed TSA officers scanned travelers with watchful eyes. Overhead, large digital screens offered reminders about prohibited items and wait times. Dahlia took a moment to step aside, brushing her palm across her forehead, gathering courage. She looked at her watch. The second hand ticked steadily, synchronized to her own racing heartbeat. Just as she was about to inch forward in line, her phone vibrated again, more insistently this time. It was a reminder from her father's caretaker. He had been ill for weeks. Dahlia almost turned around, prepared to abandon this entire plan, but she couldn't. She glanced at a photo on her phone's lock screen. Her father, a man with stoic eyes that had seen injustice too many times, gave her a silent nudge of encouragement. Dahlia advanced to the conveyor belt, removing her shoes and placing them in a plastic bin. She dropped her phone on top of them, alongside a battered wallet. Everything in her posture radiated tension, but she maintained a steady calm. She looked around again, noticing the pressed uniforms, the bored travelers, the overhead cameras monitoring, always monitoring. The line crawled forward. She could feel the bored curiosity of those behind her. It was just another day, just another traveler inching through security, but inside Dahlia's mind was a storm of memories. She remembered her father's sorrowful tales of airport discrimination. He traveled frequently for work in his younger days. She recalled her own humiliating experiences, singled out for random checks, and she carried the weight of hundreds of stories told by neighbors and friends. It wasn't just about her. This was about changing something larger. An agent waved her through the metal detector. Dahlia passed through, eyes locked straight ahead. As she stepped to retrieve her belongings from the other side, she sensed the presence of security members converging. Something was off. A second agent took her ID, scanning it with a look of practiced suspicion. The beep sounded normal enough, but the agent's brow furrowed. "Ma'am, can you step over here for a moment?" A hush fell around them, though the rest of the checkpoint continued with routine chaos. Dahlia's heart hammered in her chest. The agent didn't yet know she had come here with a plan, but Dahlia could already sense trouble. Her mouth felt dry, and her fingers twitched as her mind reeled through possibilities. She forced herself to speak calmly. "Is there an issue?" "Just a random check, ma'am," the agent said. Dahlia knew exactly how many times she'd been flagged for these random checks. She wondered if this was mere coincidence or if someone had singled her out. Maybe someone had spotted her anxious movements or recognized her from an old demonstration. Or maybe she had simply drawn the unlucky card in the security lottery. She stepped aside, her breath tight, and decided then and there that if they saw her as a threat, she would make it a moment worth remembering. Dahlia was ushered into a small glass walled enclosure just behind the main security lanes. She could see the swirl of travelers beyond it, a kaleidoscope of rushing suits and flip-flops, determined steps to gates, pre-flight jitters, and overhead announcements. But she felt distant from it all, isolated in a bubble of silent tension. A tall TSA agent with a firm jawline and watchful eyes entered the enclosure. He stood near a metal table, beckoning Dahlia to place her carry-on bag before him. She had done nothing visibly suspicious, yet a thick current of tension vibrated between them, born of their roles, agent and suspect. "Let's see what you've got," he said, voice flat. Dahlia sensed his default suspicion, sharpened by experience and too many long hours in uniform. She nodded, unzipping her bag and stepping back. This was part of the process, an opportunity to find something that would confirm their suspicions or prove them unfounded. She had nothing to hide physically, but plenty she was guarding deep in her mind. As the agent sifted through her belongings, 2 books, a small makeup pouch, a water bottle, and a neatly folded hoodie, his brow relaxed. Just a fraction. Dahlia's phone, which lay idle on the table's edge, suddenly pinged. A text notification from her father's caretaker flashed across the screen. The agent caught a glimpse of the message. Dahlia tensed. She could see his curiosity piqued, but he said nothing about it. Instead, he pointed at her wallet. "Open that up, please." She complied, revealing a few credit cards, an ID, and a folded photograph. The agent noticed the photo, Dahlia as a child, perched on her father's shoulders, both smiling broadly. It was a memory from simpler days. The agent paused, his expression shifting to mild empathy. Then he handed the wallet back, adopting a business-like efficiency once more. "All right, you're clear," he announced, "but next time, try not to look so nervous." Dahlia pursed her lips, allowing anger to simmer inside. She wanted to spit back a retort, something scathing, but she smiled politely, nodded, and gathered her things. In her mind, 1,000 replies formed. "Yes, sir. I'll try not to look too black and nervous next time." She kept those words sealed behind clenched teeth. She had a larger mission, and letting her frustration explode now wouldn't serve her. Back in the main concourse, Dahlia exhaled a trembling breath. She checked her watch. Everything was unfolding according to schedule. She took a seat near a large bay of windows and scanned the tarmac below. She needed to locate certain points of interest. A hidden service elevator, the door to the staff staircase near gate 37, and the sign pointing toward baggage handling. She scrolled her phone until she found the map she'd saved. In her notes, she saw a list of demands and bullet points about operational vulnerabilities. She had compiled every detail from her father's time working in facility management, from her own observations over countless flights, and from the testimonies of travelers who'd faced discrimination. She was here to expose the system and, if necessary, to force a complete shutdown. Dahlia slipped the phone back into her pocket and stared across the busy corridor. A coffee shop, a newsstand, a line of frustrated passengers waiting to board, all of them unsuspecting. The airport authorities had no idea she was quietly orchestrating a grand disruption, a statement that would reverberate across social media and news channels. Yet even as she plotted her next move, Dahlia was haunted by doubt. She wondered, was this the right way to spark change? Could a single dramatic act really unravel the layers of institutional bias? She closed her eyes, remembering her father's plea, "I just want you to be safe, baby girl. I want you to fight with your mind, not your fists." But she also recalled the night he was escorted off a plane for refusing to remove a T-shirt that read, "Justice for All." The memory hardened her resolve. She tightened her grip on her phone. If everything went as planned, the system would be forced to listen this time. No more polite requests that died in bureaucratic oblivion. No more peaceful protests that were ignored. This time, her voice would echo over the intercom and broadcast across every gate's waiting area. Everyone would see it, hear it, feel it. Rising to her feet, Dahlia adjusted the strap of her carry-on. She walked briskly toward the sign for Terminal B, determined to execute step 1 of her plan. Little did she know that fate and a few watchful eyes would intervene, setting off a chain of events far more dramatic than even she had imagined. Dahlia worked her way through the corridor leading to Terminal B, scanning each sign, each hidden door, marking the route she needed in her mind. She had memorized most of the layout from online schematics and from her own reconnaissance trips, but there was nothing like being on site. Every so often, she paused, pretending to check her phone or rummage through her bag, while in reality she was mapping potential cameras, counting how many TSA or security officers were within sight. After 15 minutes of steady walking, she found the discreet grey door that led to a staff staircase. Her heart quickened. Step 1 of her plan involved accessing that restricted area. She pretended not to notice it, continuing on to purchase a bottle of water from a nearby kiosk. The vendor, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a friendly smile, handed her change. Dahlia felt a twinge of guilt. The staff here were just trying to make a living. She gulped back that sentiment. She wasn't here to hurt innocent people. She was here to expose a flawed system that hurt people like her day after day. Behind her, a TSA officer strolled by, his gaze lingering on her for an extra moment. Dahlia acted casual, tucking her water into her bag, but she felt a jolt of alarm. Did he notice she'd paused near the restricted door? Or maybe he was just bored. She exhaled slowly, reminding herself not to appear suspicious. She waited for the officer to disappear from sight, then circled back to the staff door. The handle resisted when she tested it, which meant it was locked, as expected. Dahlia slid her phone out, reviewing the instructions that had been passed along by a friend who once worked airport maintenance. There was a keypad near the handle. All she needed was a code she had gleaned from an employee leak, though there was no guarantee it still worked. She keyed in the 6 digits, 190877. She felt the lock click, faint but unmistakable. A sense of triumph shot through her. Quick and silent, she slipped inside. The staircase was dim and smelled faintly of rubber and disinfectant. Each step echoed in the enclosed space, and Dahlia moved with deliberate caution. She ascended one flight, pausing at a landing to listen for footsteps. Hearing none, she continued upward. She had memorized the location of a small storage room on the 3rd level that overlooked baggage handling. From there, she intended to patch into the airport's announcement system. It was the boldest part of her plan, speaking publicly from inside the airport's own broadcasting lines. If she could do that, she might compel enough media attention that the powers that be would have no choice but to respond. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her mind. This is huge. This might land you in jail. Are you sure you want to go through with it? She shoved that voice down. Change required bold action, and she was tired of seeing people like her systematically harassed and humiliated. However, Dahlia's every move was unwittingly observed. Unbeknownst to her, a small CCTV camera above the staff door had captured her entering the restricted staircase. Seated in a security office deep in the belly of the airport, an observant guard noticed the unauthorized entry. An alert flashed on his monitor. He zoomed in on the footage, capturing Dahlia's hoodie and the nondescript backpack. Immediately, he radioed for a patrol officer to investigate. Oblivious to the tightening net, Dahlia reached the third-floor landing. There, a short corridor led to a room labeled Maintenance Storage, Authorized Personnel Only. She tested the door. Locked. She pulled out a tiny set of lock-picking tools from her pocket, a skill she'd learned from a friend who believed in direct action. Within seconds, she felt the tumblers align and heard the door click open. Heart pounding, she slipped inside and closed the door behind her. It was cramped, filled with shelves of cleaning supplies, spare uniforms, and random airport paraphernalia. In the corner stood a dusty metal cabinet, labeled Audio Access. Dahlia smiled thinly, scanning the environment for an office phone or any direct line she could tap. She found a thick cable snaking up from the floor, likely connected to the intercom infrastructure. Quietly setting her bag on a shelf, Dahlia extracted a small device that looked like a phone connector with extra wires. She knelt down beside the cable, prying open a nearby outlet panel. She had about 5 minutes to complete the hack, maybe less if security was sharper than she anticipated. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked, but adrenaline guided her movements with surprising steadiness. Just as she began splicing her connector into the line, the doorknob behind her jiggled. Dahlia froze, breath caught in her throat. The knob rattled harder, followed by a fist pounding on the door. "Maintenance? Anyone in there? Open up." She whispered a curse under her breath, scanning for a hiding spot. There was nowhere to go, no second exit, no closet she could slip into. She clutched her phone, heart banging against her ribs. The pounding on the door became more urgent. As the handle finally gave way, Dahlia braced herself. Security had found her. Her mind raced with half-formed escape plans. But before she could even decide whether to fight or flee, the door slammed open, and she was face to face with a furious security officer who blocked her only path. Her mission had just taken a drastic turn. Little did she know that the ensuing confrontation would grip the entire airport and shape the destiny. She'd only begun to imagine. "Hands where I can see them," the security officer shouted, hand on his belt. Dahlia couldn't tell if he was about to draw a weapon or radio for backup. Her stomach twisted with terror. She raised her hands slowly, feeling trapped in the small storage room. The officer's eyes flicked to the spliced wires, then back to her. His face contorted into an expression of alarm, as if he had just discovered an active bomb. Dahlia opened her mouth to speak, but the officer lunged, grabbing her wrist with a vice-like grip. "Let me explain," she pleaded, shock surging through her. She tried to wrench free, but he was too strong. The officer forced her down onto the ground. The cold concrete floor jarred her bones. Dahlia felt the sting of tears in her eyes, not just from pain, but from humiliation and rage. Was it always going to be like this? Hands pinned behind her back, accusations of wrongdoing flung at her. She heard more footsteps in the hallway. Another officer burst into the room, eyes wide as he took in the scene. "We've got a breach, possible sabotage," he said into his walkie-talkie. Dahlia bristled at the word sabotage. Yes, she was trying to disrupt the system, but the label felt all too close to something more sinister. In the corridor, voices rose. 2 more TSA agents joined the fray. Dahlia felt knees on her lower back, her arms twisted in a painful angle. The entire fiasco was unfolding as if she were some violent criminal. She tried to twist her head around to speak, but her cheek was shoved against the floor. Then came the moment that would define the headlines. One of the officers lost his balance, or perhaps overreacted, but he tackled her with excessive force. The air left Dahlia's lungs in a single, agonizing whoosh. Her ribcage felt crushed, and her vision swam. Cell phone cameras from bystanders, curious employees, ground staff captured the moment. Within seconds, those videos would begin circulating online. "Stop resisting," someone yelled, though Dahlia's ability to move was non-existent at this point. Hands pinned her arms, her legs, her neck, as if she were superhumanly strong. She managed to gasp a few desperate words. I'm unarmed, but to no avail. She heard the click of handcuffs snapping around her wrists. At that moment, a wave of despair and anger nearly overwhelmed her. All her carefully laid plans collapsed. She was no longer a protester or an activist. She was now just another black woman in cuffs. Face pressed to the ground in the eyes of the authorities. Voices buzzed around her. One TSA agent demanded, what exactly was she doing? Another rifled through her bag, producing the lockpick set, the splicing device, and her phone. Dahlia managed to catch a glimpse of alarm flitting across one officer's face. She's messing with the audio system. Could be a bomb threat, he said darkly. It's not a bomb threat, Dahlia rasped. I was. Shut it, snapped the officer, pressing down on her. The weight on her back eased fractionally as they hauled her to her feet. Her vision blurred for a moment, knees buckling. The corridor outside filled with uniformed personnel, and she could feel the stares from people who didn't know the context, who only saw a half-wild, handcuffed woman forced down a hallway. They dragged her toward a back office. Dahlia was too winded to resist, though her mind whirled with indignation and heartbreak. This wasn't how she wanted her statement to be made, through the lens of arrest and violence. But a cold, resentful part of her acknowledged it might be the only way to get widespread attention. Maybe this brutal takedown would spark the outcry she'd hoped for, though she had never intended it to be so physically agonizing. Inside the security office, they shoved her into a metal chair. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A large officer with a shaved head stepped in front of her, arms folded. He studied her for a moment. Dahlia's chest heaved as she tried to catch her breath. A bruise was forming on her left cheekbone, and her wrists throbbed from the handcuffs. "What were you doing?" the bald officer asked, voice cold. Dahlia swallowed, trying to send a message. "A message to whom?" "To everyone," she said softly, steel creeping into her tone. "Everyone who's ever been singled out because of how they look, for traveling while black, for existing in spaces that people say we don't belong." Her words hung in the air, defiance fueling each syllable. The officer's expression flickered confusion, maybe even a spark of empathy, before it hardened again. He turned to his colleagues. "We need to contact the authorities. This is above our pay grade." Two of the officers left the room, presumably to call the local police or maybe even the FBI, as the airport's threat procedures dictated. Dahlia felt the chilling reality settle over her. She had crossed a line that might bring charges of terrorism or sabotage, though she intended no violence. She only wanted to highlight the daily humiliations, the entrenched biases, the oppressive nature of a system that too often turned a blind eye to inequality. Still cuffed, Dahlia bowed her head. She inhaled a shaky breath and prayed to gather the strength to face whatever would come next. Outside the office, frantic movement and muffled voices suggested her capture was big news already. Within minutes, the story would spread through every corner of the airport, then beyond on social media, on local TV, and possibly national news. A swirl of panic and resolve battled inside her. She'd been tackled, humiliated, but also thrown onto a stage larger than she ever could have orchestrated alone. Little did she know that this was just the beginning of a chain reaction that would shake the airport's foundation and thrust her name into headlines worldwide. News traveled fast in the age of smartphones. By the time Dahlia was processed into an airport detention cell, a cramped room with cinder block walls, passengers, in the concourse were already passing around the video of her takedown. Social media lit up with hashtags, hashtag Black Woman Tackled, hashtag Airport Injustice, and hashtag Racial Profiling. Some people posted outraged comments, condemning the violence, while others leaped to defend the security response, claiming it was necessary for safety. Either way, the video had gone viral, and in the swirl of confusion, Dahlia's voice was a whisper in a storm of opinions. In that detention cell, Dahlia paced the floor, hands rubbing her sore wrists. Her heart felt heavy, but her determination was unwavering. Yes, she had been stopped. Yes, she faced arrest and potential prison time. But she also sensed a strange victory. The world was finally forced to acknowledge what people like her endured all too often. If even one person watched that footage and realized the brutality of prejudice, maybe it was worth it. Outside, the airport was in chaos. Crowds formed near the security checkpoint, demanding answers. Journalists arrived, cameras rolling. Spokespersons for Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport hastily prepared statements. TSA officials tried to contain rumors. A flurry of overhead announcements asked travelers to remain calm, but tension crackled in the air. Flights faced delays as staff scrambled to ensure there was no larger threat. TSA agents quietly questioned each other. Did we overreact? Are we in for a PR nightmare? Meanwhile, in a small hospital in the nearby suburbs, Dahlia's father watched the viral footage on a borrowed laptop. He stared in shock as his daughter's image flickered across the screen, pinned to the ground by uniformed men. Tears rimmed his eyes. He reached for his caretaker's hand, voice shaking with dread. "That's my baby," he said, heartbreak evident. He knew Dahlia's anger ran deep, but he never imagined it would come to this. Back in the detention cell, Dahlia was startled by the sound of the door opening. A woman in a sharp black suit stepped inside, accompanied by a uniformed airport police officer. The woman introduced herself as Adeline Bradley, a lawyer with a prominent civil rights organization. Dahlia's eyes widened. How had a lawyer managed to get in here so fast? Adeline offered a small, reassuring smile. "We saw the footage," she explained. "My organization, the Justice for All Coalition, is determined to ensure your rights are protected." Relief washed over Dahlia, but skepticism flickered in her eyes. "I don't have money to pay for legal representation." Adeline nodded. "We're here pro bono. Also, you have supporters outside who are willing to help. This might become a landmark case." Dahlia sagged against the wall, knees weak with relief. She never expected help to arrive so swiftly. She had mentally prepared to stand alone, to face every consequence by herself. Now, maybe she wasn't alone at all. The airport police officer cleared his throat. "We've got limited space. We'll let you talk to your client for a few minutes. Keep it short." Adeline Bradley set her briefcase down and produced a notepad. Her voice was calm but purposeful. "We need your statement, everything that happened from the moment you arrived at the airport until your arrest." Dahlia took a shaky breath, recounting the details, the suspicious stares at security, the so-called random check, her decision to slip into the staff staircase, and her plan to hijack the intercom to deliver a message. Adeline listened intently, scribbling notes and occasionally nodding. When Dahlia finished, Adeline tapped her pen on the notepad. "You're potentially facing charges of trespassing, attempted sabotage, resisting arrest, maybe more, depending on how the airport authorities spin it. But we'll mount a defense that your intent was purely peaceful protest, that you never posed a real threat." Dahlia's voice trembled. "They pinned me down like I was a terrorist." Adeline's eyes darkened with empathy. "I know, and that's why the public is outraged. The system will try to paint you in the worst possible light, but the footage clearly shows excessive force. We'll argue that any so-called crime you committed was non-violent. We'll also stress the racial profiling aspect. Racial profiling. The words echoed in Dahlia's mind like a half-forgotten chord. She realized that no matter what came next, this was bigger than just her. She bowed her head for a moment, letting the gravity of the situation settle in. Outside the detention cell, the hum of urgent activity continued. Airport staff were in crisis mode, dealing with public relations fallout. News reporters swarmed the terminal, vying for interviews with eyewitnesses. Demonstrators began to gather near the airport entrance, chanting Dahlia's name. Social media clamored for statements from activists, politicians, and celebrities. For a moment, Dahlia's action had become the spark for a national conversation on race and security. But Dahlia also knew that after the initial burst of attention, the story could fade away unless she and her allies seized the moment. She needed to articulate her reasons. She needed to ensure that the conversation wouldn't just be about her, but about every person who had been unfairly targeted. She prayed her father would understand. She prayed her father's health would hold up. As Adeline prepared to leave, she offered Dahlia a final piece of advice. This is far from over, but remember, you have people on your side. You've lit a match in the darkness, and now everyone sees the flame. The detention cell door closed, leaving Dahlia alone once more. She sank down onto the small bench, head resting against the cinder block wall. Though her body ached, her spirit felt oddly alive. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen even if that visibility came with a heavy cost. Dahlia was transferred from the airport detention area to a holding cell at the Atlanta Police Department. Exhausted and tense, she reflected on childhood moments with her father and the many times she felt singled out by authorities. Those memories now fueled her determination to stand up for herself and others, despite the fear gnawing at her. In the cell, Dahlia received a brief, emotional phone call from her ailing father. He had seen the viral footage of her takedown and worried for her safety. She assured him somewhat unconvincingly that she was fine. His support strengthened her resolve, even though guilt weighed heavily on her for putting him through such stress. Adeline Bradley visited, explaining that the charges included trespassing, resistance, and potential sabotage. Dahlia felt the enormity of it all, but refused to recant her motives. Though surrounded by uncertainty, she clung to the belief that shining a light on injustice was worth every risk. Dahlia's arraignment took place in a courthouse teeming with journalists, supporters, and airport staff. Clad in an orange jumpsuit, she was led into the courtroom by 2 officers. Cameras flashed, and a flurry of whispered commentary rippled through the gallery. Dahlia lifted her head, trying to project the confidence she didn't fully feel. Her ankles were shackled, her wrists cuffed, and she felt every jarring rattle as she shuffled forward. Judge Marlene Killeran presided over the hearing. She was a middle-aged woman with a stern face, known for her firm but fair approach. Adeline Bradley stood by Dahlia's side, ready to plead her case for bail. The prosecuting attorney, a neatly dressed man named Gavin Holcomb, argued that Dahlia posed a flight risk and a danger to public safety. He described her attempt to access the airport intercom as a deliberate act of sabotage that could have caused widespread panic. This was a well-planned trespass, he insisted, and we have evidence of her tools, her prior activism, and her willingness to break the law for her cause. At that, a murmur spread through the courtroom. Dahlia's supporters hissed disapproval while media personnel took rapid notes. Dahlia's cheeks burned. She clenched her jaw, determined not to let Holcomb's words diminish her resolve. Adeline, unruffled, responded with measured calm. My client, Miss Henderson, acted out of desperation to highlight systemic racial profiling at the airport. She carried no weapons, harmed no one, and was met with excessive force. We see a grave miscarriage of justice here, Your Honor. When Judge Killeran finally spoke, her voice was clipped and unemotional. Given Miss Henderson's community ties and the nature of these charges, the court sets bail at $50,000. She banged her gavel. Next hearing is set for 2 weeks from now. Outside, cheers erupted from a crowd holding signs of support. Dahlia's father, in spite of his failing health, had insisted on being there. He stood at the back, leaning on a walker, eyes misty with pride and fear. Dahlia could only flash him a small smile before officers led her back to a holding area. She felt a surge of relief at the possibility of release, but anxiety gnawed at her. $50,000 was no small sum. As if on cue, Adeline arrived in the holding area with good news. Several fundraising efforts had raised more than enough for bail. "You're going home," she said quietly. Dahlia nearly collapsed in gratitude. Hours later, after processing, Dahlia stepped out of the courthouse into a throng of cameras and microphones. Shouts and questions bombarded her. "Are you a terrorist? Do you regret what you did? Do you have a statement?" Dahlia shielded her eyes, but couldn't avoid the barrage. She spotted her father waiting in a wheelchair now, the caretaker behind him. His eyes shone with relief. Dahlia rushed to him, kneeling to gently embrace him. Camera shutters clicked in a frenzy at the emotional scene. "I'm okay, Dad," she whispered, tears burning her eyes. "I'm okay." Over the next few days, Dahlia stayed at her father's small apartment, surrounded by family photos and the beeping of medical devices. A wave of supportive messages poured in from strangers across the country who saw her as a symbol of resistance against racial profiling. But vitriolic hate messages also filled her inbox, labeling her a criminal, an anarchist, a race baiter. She tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the comfort of her father's presence. Amid this chaos, alliances formed. Leaders from civil rights groups reached out, offering platforms for Dahlia to share her story. Politicians looking to champion social justice issues wanted her endorsement, though Dahlia eyed their sudden enthusiasm with suspicion. Corporate sponsors even dangled opportunities for paid interviews or talk show appearances. It made her head spin. She'd expected condemnation, not a spotlight. Conversely, more intimidating forces emerged. She received a legal notice from the airport authorities demanding damages. The figure was staggering tens of thousands of dollars for property disruption and delayed flights. Dahlia felt a lump in her throat, realizing how powerless she might be against these monolithic institutions. The night she opened that notice, she locked herself in her old bedroom and wept. Even her father's gentle knocks at the door couldn't draw her out at first. Behind the scenes, an even more concerning threat grew. Unnamed sources began leaking rumors to the press whispers that Dahlia might have ties to extremist groups. None of it was true, but once such accusations surfaced, they gained traction. Her social media filled with conspiracy theories painting her as a radical agent funded by shadowy organizations. Dahlia tried to laugh it off, but fear lurked beneath the surface. Adeline Bradley, meanwhile, was unflinching. She assured Dahlia they'd fight every smear tactic in court. "This is a classic move," she explained. "Paint the activist as dangerous to distract from the real issue of airport discrimination." Late one evening, Dahlia found herself unable to sleep. She wandered into the living room, where her father dozed in a recliner, tubes in his nostrils, oxygen tank by his side. She gently adjusted his blanket, guilt washing over her. Part of her regretted pulling him into this chaotic storm. Another part felt compelled to continue, for his sake, for her own, for all those who'd been silenced. She stood by the window, gazing at the moonlit street outside. Life had changed irreversibly. Friends and foes revealed themselves in unexpected ways. The only certainty was that the trial ahead would be a battleground, and Dahlia would have to stand firm fighting not just for her own freedom, but for a future where no one else had to endure what she'd gone through. The day of Dahlia's preliminary hearing arrived under ominous grey skies. She awoke early, nerves buzzing like high-tension wires. Her father insisted on accompanying her, despite his caretaker's objections that he needed rest. "I will not hide away," he declared, determined to support his daughter. Dahlia hugged him gently, marveling at his unwavering strength. In the courthouse lobby, camera crews and journalists milled about, hungry for new developments. Adeline guided Dahlia and her father through the throng, deflecting invasive questions. Once inside the courtroom, Dahlia settled into a chair, scanning the wooden benches, packed with supporters, activists, and curious members of the public. The room teemed with a low buzz of anticipation. When the bailiff called Dahlia's name, she stood and approached the defense table with Adeline. On the other side, Gavin Holcomb, the prosecutor, stared at her with a tight-lipped frown. The tension between defense and prosecution was palpable. The hearing began with witness testimonies. The prosecution called airport security officers who had tackled Dahlia. One by one, they described her actions in the restricted maintenance room, framing them as a grave security threat. Each officer insisted they had used the necessary force to neutralize a potential saboteur. Dahlia's jaw clenched. She remembered the brute weight on her back, the sense of helplessness. Necessary force, those words felt like a stone in her stomach. Next came the airport official, who testified about damages, flight delays, rescreening processes, public panic. He rattled off figures in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Dahlia's heart sank as she realized the scale of the burden they were piling onto her. Holcomb hammered home the narrative. Dahlia's actions had jeopardized countless lives. Finally, it was Adeline's turn to present her side. She methodically introduced video evidence, the viral clips showing Dahlia being tackled and pinned down. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the footage of an unarmed woman forcibly held on the floor played on a large screen. Adeline let the silence settle before she spoke. This footage clearly shows a disproportionate use of force. Miss Henderson was not armed, and she repeatedly stated she was unarmed. We maintain that racial bias influenced this response. The question here is not just about a trespass. It's about how this system treats certain people as perpetual threats. Holcomb countered. She had a lockpick set and was tampering with airport property. That alone is grounds for severe consequences. Let's not forget the potential meltdown she could have triggered. Adeline refused to back down. We acknowledge my client trespassed, but was the force used justified? And why was she flagged for additional screening in the first place? Miss Henderson's personal experience reflects a broader problem of profiling that many travelers of color endure regularly. That is the core issue we must address. The hearing progressed, each side fighting to shape the narrative. Tension rose further when Adeline called an unexpected witness, a former TSA employee who had worked at Hartsfield-Jackson. The man's voice shook as he recounted internal memos encouraging officers to pay special attention to people who looked nervous or out of place, often code for minority travelers. Holcomb attempted to dismiss the testimony as hearsay, but Judge Killoran allowed it, seemingly intrigued by what this might reveal about systemic bias. The revelation caused a stir in the courtroom, with murmurs of outrage from activists in the gallery. At recess, Dahlia found a quiet corner to steady herself. Her father waited with a weary expression, caretaker at his side. "Don't lose heart," he whispered, taking her hand. "Truth has a way of coming out." When the court reconvened, Dahlia took the stand in her own defense. Her stomach fluttered, but she drew courage from her father's unwavering gaze. Under Adeline's gentle questioning, Dahlia explained her history, The countless times she'd been pulled aside for extra security checks, her father's experiences of harassment, and her decision to stage a disruptive but non-violent act of protest. She emphasized that her intention was never to endanger anyone, she only wanted to expose an injustice. Holcomb's cross-examination was fierce. He tried to paint Dahlia as a reckless agitator with no regard for public safety. "Do you realize how terrifying it is to think someone is accessing airport intercoms?" he demanded. Dahlia inhaled sharply. "I do. But I also realize how terrifying it is to be singled out over and over again, to be treated like a criminal because of my skin color. That terror is never broadcast on the news, but it's real." A hush fell. Even Judge Killoran seemed taken aback by Dahlia's raw sincerity. Holcomb pressed further, but Dahlia held firm. When she finished her testimony, she returned to her seat, nerves on edge, but a sense of relief coursed through her. The hearing concluded with Judge Killoran announcing she would review the evidence and issue a ruling on whether the case would proceed to trial on all charges or if some would be dismissed. She recessed the court for the day, leaving a swirl of uncertainty in her wake. Outside, reporters pounced. Dahlia stood on the courthouse steps, Adeline by her side. Microphones crowded her face. She offered a short statement. "I believe in fairness. I believe in security that doesn't discriminate. That's why I did what I did, and that's why I'll keep fighting." Across social media, the courtroom drama ignited further debate. Some hailed Dahlia as a modern Rosa Parks, standing up against airport profiling. Others slandered her as a cunning lawbreaker who nearly caused a security nightmare. In the midst of this storm, Dahlia felt torn between fear of the pending trial and a fiery resolve to stand her ground. That night, while she sat with her father, feeding him spoonfuls of chicken soup, she sensed change in the air. People were really talking about systemic bias, and that, despite the mountains of stress and possible jail time, filled her with a precarious hope. In the days that followed the preliminary hearing, Dahlia found herself in a whirlwind of meetings, strategy sessions, and interviews. The public's fascination with her case only grew. Every night, newscasters debated her motives, dissected the footage of her takedown, and analyzed the legal implications. She became a polarizing figure, an emblem of courage to some and a threat to public safety to others. Amid the storm, Adeline worked tirelessly to bolster their defense. She dug deep into case law, hoping to illustrate patterns of leniency for other protesters who had trespassed at airports, albeit mostly white activists who had faced milder repercussions. She interviewed more TSA whistleblowers, collecting testimonies about racial profiling. Dahlia assisted in every way possible, though the intensity of the campaign often left her exhausted. One afternoon, while Dahlia was resting in her father's apartment, she received a phone call from a restricted number. Initially wary, she answered, prepared to hang up if it was another harassing message. Instead, a soft voice introduced herself as Simone Bradley, no relation to Adeline, an assistant district attorney in another county. Simone hinted that she had information that could help Dahlia's case, something about higher-ups in the airport's management possibly orchestrating a cover-up regarding discriminatory policies. Dahlia listened with growing excitement. Could this be the smoking gun they needed? They arranged a secret meeting at a quiet diner on the outskirts of the city. Dahlia arrived with Adeline, hearts pounding in anticipation. Simone was already seated, wearing a casual sweater and jeans, looking nothing like a government official. She appeared nervous, eyes darting around the diner. Over steaming cups of coffee, Simone confessed that she had encountered internal memos instructing TSA officers to use heightened discretion towards certain demographics, especially those who appeared agitated or exhibited signs of potential radicalism, which were suspiciously broad categories often applied to black and brown travelers. She claimed these memos came from a top official at Hartsfield-Jackson. If that official's involvement was proven, it would vindicate Dahlia's assertion of systematic profiling. Adeline's eyes gleamed with triumph. "Do you have copies of these memos?" Simone hesitated, lowering her voice. "I have digital records, but sharing them openly could jeopardize my career. You have to promise absolute discretion about how you got them." They reached an understanding, exchanging contact details. After Simone departed, Dahlia and Adeline lingered, discussing the impact of these documents on the upcoming trial. Their spirits soared, but a nagging doubt tugged at Dahlia's mind. Trusting a stranger with such a bombshell revelation carried risks. They had no choice but to take the gamble. The next morning, Dahlia woke to a disheartening text from Simone. "I can't do this. It's too risky." Dahlia's heart sank. Were they being played, or had Simone gotten cold feet? She tried calling multiple times, but the number was disconnected. The lifeline had vanished. Desperate, Dahlia confided in Adeline. The lawyer tried to remain optimistic but couldn't hide her concern. It's possible Simone was intimidated by her superiors. "We'll keep searching for other leads, but this is a setback." Dahlia felt the sting of betrayal. Another dramatic twist, another hope dashed. She clutched her father's hand that evening, finding solace in his steady presence. "All we can do is keep going," he whispered. To make matters worse, Dahlia discovered that a close friend, someone she had grown up with, was feeding private information to the prosecution in exchange for money. The friend, once supportive, had shown the prosecution private messages Dahlia had sent about planning a protest at the airport, proof that her trespassing wasn't entirely spur of the moment. Dahlia was heartbroken. She confronted her friend, who confessed tearfully that financial desperation had driven them to it. Fury roiled in Dahlia's gut. "I needed you," she said, voice shaking. "I trusted you." The friend apologized over and over, but the damage was done. She left, tears hot on her cheeks, feeling the world's betrayal weigh heavily on her shoulders. In the midst of these twists, Dahlia tried to remain focused on her father's health. Each time she returned home, she noted with alarm his growing frailty. The caretaker assured her he was receiving the best possible treatment, but Dahlia couldn't shake the guilt that her legal battles drained energy and resources she might otherwise devote to him. One late night, Dahlia found herself alone in the living room, the only light coming from a dim lamp. She scrolled through social media, seeing posts both praising and condemning her. She shut her eyes, mind spinning. She recalled a quote her father had once shared: "Sometimes you have to walk through darkness to find the light." She breathed deeply, deciding that despite betrayals and setbacks, she wouldn't give up. But the biggest betrayal of all was yet to come. A day later, Adeline received an anonymous tip that the judge assigned to Dahlia's trial had personal ties to a security firm contracted by Hartsfield-Jackson. If true, the impartiality of the trial would be at grave risk. Dahlia's head pounded with disbelief. Could the deck be stacked against her from the start? She and Adeline pored over documents, trying to verify the judge's connections, but everything remained murky. No direct evidence emerged, just rumors. Without solid proof, they couldn't request the judge's recusal. Still, the knowledge hung over them like a thundercloud. One more reason to fear that justice might be out of reach. Each twist and betrayal chipped away at Dahlia's hope, yet beneath the despair, she felt a mounting determination to push forward. Hard karma was swirling in the air, waiting to strike those who manipulated the truth for their own ends. Whether Dahlia's stand would lead to victory or tragedy remained uncertain, but she was too far in now to retreat. The day of Dahlia's trial began under a bright, cloudless sky, an almost mocking backdrop to the tension simmering inside the courthouse. A crowd gathered outside, brandishing signs that read "Justice for Dahlia" and "End Airport Profiling." Across the street, counter-protesters insisted on the importance of airport security at all costs. Media vans lined the roads, cameras pointed at the courthouse steps. Inside the courtroom, Dahlia felt a cold sweat trickling down her spine. She glanced at her father in the front row, who offered a weak smile from his wheelchair. His presence both calmed her and stoked her determination. She felt Adeline's reassuring hand on her shoulder as they rose for the judge's entrance. Judge Marlene Killoran took her seat, gavel echoing in the silent room. "We're here for the state of Georgia versus Dahlia Henderson," she declared. Her gaze swept across the courtroom, pausing momentarily on Dahlia. No one could read her expression. The jury, selected after much wrangling, watched with somber attentiveness. The prosecutor, Gavin Holcomb, began by painting Dahlia as an orchestrator of chaos who endangered countless lives. He cited evidence, the lockpick set, her infiltration of restricted areas, her direct attempt to tap into the airport's public address system. Her actions were calculated and reckless, he insisted. "We must hold her accountable for nearly causing a mass panic," Adeline responded with equal force. She showed the viral footage of Dahlia being tackled and played testimonies from travelers of color who had experienced similar scrutiny. She pointed to the whistleblower's statement, indicating that top officials encouraged racial profiling, though she lacked the damning memos to conclusively prove it. Still, a pattern emerged. Dahlia's actions, while illegal, were a desperate cry for reform in a system rigged against her. Witness after witness took the stand: TSA agents, airport officials, civil rights activists. Each side battled to shape the narrative. Dahlia found herself reliving the painful tackle over and over. She saw it in slow motion on the courtroom screens, felt the gasping humiliation of that moment. Then came the turning point karma in a tangible form. Midway through the trial, a major leak hit the internet. The airport's internal memos surfaced online, published by an anonymous source. They revealed that top-level management at Hartsfield-Jackson had indeed circulated instructions to target specific demographics under vague, heightened discretion. The memos were real. Exactly as Simone Bradley had described, news of the leak set the courtroom abuzz. Holcomb's face turned pale. Judge Killoran ordered an immediate review of the new evidence. Within hours, the memos had been authenticated by digital forensics experts. The tide shifted dramatically. The prosecution's cornerstone, that Dahlia's claims of racial profiling were baseless, crumbled. Holcomb attempted damage control, arguing the memos were not official policy, but rather misguided communications from a single individual. But the damage was done. Public opinion flipped like a switch, and even some jurors looked shaken by the revelation. Adeline seized the moment. "Your Honor, these memos validate my client's core assertion. The airport was systematically targeting black travelers. Miss Henderson's actions, while disruptive, were a response to real injustice. We must question whether the force used against her and these heavy charges result from a protocol that discriminates." Judge Killoran's eyes narrowed at the mention of the memos. She requested a short recess, leaving the courtroom in a frenzied chatter. Dahlia glanced at her father, tears brimming in her eyes. He gave a weak nod of approval. This was the break they needed, the truth finally surfacing in a dramatic fashion. When court reconvened, the judge made a critical announcement. "Given the new evidence that has come to light, I am allowing the defense to present arguments about the airport's discriminatory protocol as directly relevant to the charges against Miss Henderson. Furthermore, the court must evaluate whether the security response was proportionate and unbiased." Holcomb's posture sagged, the blow palpable. Dahlia felt a surge of hope, gratitude for the mysterious leaker. Justice, it seemed, had a way of rising to the surface, despite attempts to bury it. The final days of the trial were tense. The prosecution attempted to pivot, focusing on Dahlia's trespassing and lockpicking. But the big question loomed: would the jury see her as a reckless agitator or a victim of systemic injustice who resorted to extreme measures? In closing arguments, Adeline spoke eloquently about the legacy of civil disobedience, drawing parallels to historical figures who broke laws to expose societal wrongs. Miss Henderson risked her freedom to shed light on an unjust system, Adeline said. The real danger was not her splicing a wire, it was the daily discrimination practiced by those entrusted to keep us safe. After a nerve-wracking deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. On the charge of criminal trespass, they found Dahlia guilty, as she had clearly admitted to being in a restricted area. But on the more serious charges of sabotage, conspiracy, and resisting arrest, they found her not guilty. The excessive force claim, though not part of the criminal trial, appeared justified by the evidence, laying grounds for a separate civil case. Dahlia's punishment for trespass amounted to probation and community service, a far cry from the years of prison the prosecution had sought. A spontaneous cheer erupted in the courtroom from her supporters. Dahlia felt her knees buckle with relief. Tears flowed freely as she turned to embrace Adeline. The storm was over, or at least this chapter of it. Outside, cameras flashed again. Microphones were thrust at Dahlia as she emerged on the courthouse steps, her father by her side. She spoke calmly, voice cracking with emotion. "I accept responsibility for trespassing, but I stand by my purpose. We must address the systemic bias that affects travelers of color every day." I hope this trial begins that conversation. The final turn of karma landed on airport management. The leaked memos triggered internal investigations, resignations at high levels, and new directives for bias training and oversight. A legal avalanche fell upon those who had perpetuated the discriminatory policies. Dahlia's father, smiling through his exhaustion, told her it was the best outcome. They could have hoped for real, tangible change. That night, back in the warm embrace of home, Dahlia removed her court shoes and sank onto the couch. Her father napped in his room, caretaker close by. She gazed at the ceiling, letting out a long breath of relief. She had risked everything to shine a light on injustice. Though bruised and battered by the ordeal, her spirit felt victorious. The world had seen a black woman tackled at airport security, only to discover she was there to shut the place down in a way no one expected, by forcing it to face its own prejudice. The cost was high, but karma had hit back at those who deserved it, and Dahlia, against all odds, had survived with her voice unbroken. This story may be wrapped up, but its impact lingers in every airport line and security checkpoint across the country. Dahlia's journey exposed a system that often discriminated quietly, all while masking those biases behind the veil of safety. In her fight for justice, she risked her reputation, her freedom, and nearly her health, but she refused to let a flawed system crush her. By standing up in court, she not only dodged a harsh sentence, but forced powerful institutions to rethink their policies and accountability. Her courage, while controversial, sparked meaningful dialogue that continues to reverberate in public and private spaces alike. If this story moved you, don't forget to leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Make sure you hit the like button to show your support for confronting injustice. And subscribe to stay tuned for more stories that shine a light on truths hidden in our everyday world. Together, our voices can drive the change that Dahlia fought so hard to ignite.